Okay, hello everybody. I'm delighted to be giving this talk as part of National Biodiversity Week and in association with Galway County Council. And it's a shame it's not face to face, it's not a talk in person, but hopefully that'll be possible again in the not too distant future. So the topic that I'm going to talk about is one of my favourites, which is barn owls, and I'm going to talk about barn owls, the history of barn owls in Ireland, what we know about them, why they're important in the environment, and why they're important to study, and also focus on some of the research and conservation work that we've done recently, and with a particular focus on Galway as well. So the barn owls, I can talk about them all day, so I'm going to try and limit myself to a reasonable time frame, and I hope you enjoy the talk. So, firstly, this is the bird in all its glory, and how can you not love barn owls? And I think that they're a fantastic species to work on from that perspective, just because everybody seems to know about barn owls, and everybody seems to have a kind of hold barn owls in a special place, and they're definitely one of those birds that if you're lucky enough to see them, you never forget it. And this, you can see here, they've got really broad wingspan. People are always blown away when they see barn owls in flight, just the broad wingspan. But then equally, with the bird when they're perched can seem a lot smaller. This is actually footage that we recorded that was filmed at a site in Galway. And so this is the bird. You can see there's no sound in this, but that's probably apt because barn owls are very silent flight, almost completely silent flight. And this is their kind of hunting. They tend to fly quite low to the ground, and they're listening for the rustlings of the small mammal prey making noises in the undergrowth. And that we will talk a little bit about. Also creates problems for them, makes them susceptible to being hit on the roads as well due to their hunting behaviour. But as soon as you see a barn owl, just by looking at them, you can tell that they're a top predator. Everything about them smacks of being adapted to hunt for their small mammal prey. And I said about the broad wingspan, and then also you can see they've got very long legs, and that allows them to dive into the deep undergrowth to catch the typically small mammal prey, the likes of rats and mice and voles and shrews, and then also very sharp talons, obviously for seizing their prey. And one of the amazing adaptations of barn owls is that they have almost completely silent flight, and they have a special adaptation. You can see the small barbs on the outer primary feathers, and that kind of softens the noise, softens the wind as it goes over their feathers in flight, and that's advantageous to them for two reasons really. Firstly, that because they hunt mostly by hearing, it's true that barn owls have a very good eyesight, but their actual main hunting tool is by hearing, because a lot of the prey would be concealed in the in the long grass and the undergrowth, and so while they're hunting, they want to be able to listen. So they're if they're making a lot of noise, and some other birds, you hear them flapping, and there's a lot of noise with that would obviously detract from the ability of barn owls to pick up their prey by hearing them. And also as well, it means then that they're not giving the game away. They're not alerting their prey to their presence if they're making a lot of noise flying around. So it's absolutely amazing to see. They're like almost ghostly, just wafting over your head if anyone's been lucky enough to see them, but with very little sound. Amazing bird to see just in the dead of night like that. And then also as well, they have what's known as the characteristic heart-shaped facial disc, and again that's an adaptation to aid their hunting, their hearing, and it acts essentially like a satellite dish to funnel the sounds through these tufts, through these feathers as part of the satellite dish to their ear. And they've actually got very, very big ears for the proportion of the birds, but obviously they just tucked away behind the facial disc. So absolutely amazing predator. There've been trials done with barn owls in captivity, which in completely dark situation, and the birds were still able to catch their prey just by sound alone, by hearing movements and by pinpointing the prey by sound alone, and obviously in complete pitch darkness couldn't see. So this is essentially what's on the menu. And one of the questions really that's important is to ask is why, why barn owls are important. Why do we go to these efforts to learn more about them, to study them, to try and conserve them? And I would say there are many reasons. So one of those reasons being that barn owls, as I mentioned, they're top predators. They sit at the top of the food chain, and because of that, you can see there. This is kind of the typical menu of barn owls, depending on where they are, where you are in the country. But primarily these prey items on the left hand side, small mammal species, so rodents and the shrew species. And because of that, because they sit at the top of the food chain, that means that they're top predators, we can learn an awful lot about not only barn owls, but about what's going on in the wider environment by studying barn owls, by seeing how their population is faring, what factors are affecting their population. And we're seeing more and more about what we can learn from raptor species and other top predators, and use those as indicators for the health of the environment. And there's many examples, even just looking at barn owls in Ireland, that we've learned. For example, the discovery of invasive small mammal species to Ireland and being able to map their distribution throughout the country, as well as exposure of rodenticides to wildlife. So while we're learning about barn owls, obviously that's important to inform their conservation, but it's also really important to get a better sense for some of these factors that are affecting other wildlife and that are happening in the wider environment. Also, barn owls are important to study because the population has declined quite dramatically over the past 4 or 5 decades. And the barn owls are very much a farmland bird. They're a bird, associated and dependent on farmland. And we've seen these similar trends, similar downward trends in many other farmland bird species. And we've seen the likes of corncrake and curlew, species like yellowhammer corn bunting, which is no longer present in Ireland, which was once a breeding species and is now extinct in Ireland. So farmland birds in general are, a lot of farmland birds are in trouble, or have been in trouble, and some we've even lost. And that is the situation. That has been the situation with barn owls as well. So again, that kind of that's very worrying to see those trends. We need to figure out what's causing those downward declines, and also to try and address those problems. Because obviously, if barn owls aren't doing well in the countryside, that's indicative of other problems that are likely affecting a whole suite of other wildlife, but are obviously obvious in barn owl populations. And they are a red-listed bird of conservation concern. And just recently, through BirdWatch Ireland, the RSPB, we published the most recent red-listed the birds of conservation concern in Ireland. And that essentially it works on a traffic light system to identify those which are at most risk, and those which are most endangered being those that are red-listed bird of conservation concern. And we've seen a few additions, like this guy here, the kestrel, to the recent list. And obviously, kestrel and barn owl, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap in terms of diet, even in terms of some of the nesting sites that they use. And you'll see the barn owl is still on the red list and has been for some time now, and that's because of the declines that we know about in their breeding range and in their population. As I'll talk through the presentation, you'll see that there are some positives, definitely, and particularly recently, and some early signs of a population recovery, hopefully. So possibly we might be in a situation whereby barn owl, maybe the information will show might be possible to remove them from the red list in the future. But for the moment, for this period, they're still on the red list and still require focused research and conservation efforts directed to them. Another reason why barn owls are important is barn owls are hugely important species culturally and particularly throughout the world, and particularly in Ireland. Irish people barn owls just seem to really strike a chord with people in Ireland. And there's probably a few different reasons for that. This being one of them. Barn owls are very much tied into our mythology, our folklore, particularly tales of the Banshee, which was this woman that screamed and foretold death. And a large part of the background to that story is from the barn owl screech, the barn owl blood-curdling scream. And you can easily tell why when you hear it. This is a male barn owl screech. And now this is female. And you can imagine hearing that in the dead of night and not knowing what is, not knowing what's making that sound, and it can be pretty scary. And then this sound that I'm going to play then is what's known as snoring. And again, another strange sound. This is the barn owls don't make the twit through the classic owl sound that's thought. In fact, these calls and sounds are very, very different. But this sound, snoring, this is music to your ears, and this is what you'll hear at this time of the year, where barn owls are breeding. This is the call of the young, snoring, essentially begging for food. And if you hear the sound, it means that there's chicks present, or at least a female will also make this sound earlier and make this call earlier in the season. But it's exactly what you want to hear. So it's like a hissing, and again, beautiful sound to hear. But you can imagine if you're not sure what's making that sound, it's coming from an old ruined derelict building, can be pretty strange. And another reason then why barn owls are important, and culturally as well as for the role they play as top predators, is this is probably one of the reasons as well why barn owls are so popular in Ireland, so well loved, is that going back, in the days before rodenticides, before there was rat poisons used, barn owls were one of the best means of natural rodent control. And they're because they're such efficient predators, efficient hunters. Using nest cameras in Ireland, we've seen that the birds can bring back, the adults can bring back up to 25 prey items in a single night during the breeding season to feed their chicks. So you can imagine the role that they can play in terms of controlling rodents. And they were very much known as the farmer's friend, and I think some of that as it remains to this day. And you'll see still a lot of the old style stone buildings where there was special entrances left for barn owls to access the loft space and to encourage them to nest in the loft space. And it was seen as hugely beneficial and hugely lucky to have barn owls nesting within the farmyard, just because of that role that they played in terms of controlling rats and mice. And I'll talk a bit about it shortly, but it's kind of ironic now that the rodenticides that have been developed to control rats and mice now can have a serious problem for barn owls and for other predators, for other wildlife generally, which we'll talk about. And also as well, this is probably one of the reasons why barn owls are so well known, so popular in Ireland. They're the poster bird for the Late Late Show. And that has definitely gained them a lot of notoriety and a lot of popularity. Although I have to say that this image of the barn owl here, this isn't an Irish barn owl, and you can tell by its plumage, by its colorations. Irish barn owls are very, very much whiter than a lot of the birds on the continent. So and as well, to take a look back, take a step back of the what we know about barn owls in terms of their populations, the status. So I think they can be a difficult species to study because they're nocturnal. It's not possible to go out and observe them in the same way as it is with other birds that should be active during the day. But once you get your eye and kind of survey methods, they can be relatively straightforward. But the baseline that there wasn't a huge amount of work done on barn owls in the past, and so it's more recently really that we've increased our understanding of them. But I suppose and this kind of reflective, going back in the past, you can see this is a map from a book by Colin Shire, who's done a huge amount of work on barn owls in the UK, and you can see the red areas are what's thought to be barn owl hotspots, and you can see just a question mark there over Ireland. And then this is for another map, which is a little bit later, which showed the supposed distribution of barn owls in Ireland, and kind of with kind of areas missing here along the west. But we've seen recently that some of these areas are some of the best in the country for barn owls in Ireland, and say particularly down around the southwest and the Midwest as well. So this really shows the importance of learning about barn owls and study them and within Ireland. And what we've seen as well is there's huge differences between barn owls in Ireland and in Great Britain in terms of their the population size, the availability of nest sites, and also as well their actual behaviour, their actual ecology, and there's huge differences in terms of the prey species that are available. So that really kind of shows that we have to learn about barn owls specific to Ireland to inform their conservation. And also as well more recently through the Breeding Bird Atlas, which is a bird survey carried out every 20 years of all species across Ireland and Britain to track their trends, track changes in their populations and in their breeding ranges. And this was the map of the first breeding atlas in the late 60s, early 70s, and you can see the orange dots there where barn owls were confirmed during the first breeding atlas. And then when we jump forward to the late 80s, early 90s, you can see a very different picture. And over that period, obviously, there was pretty significant declines. And then if we jump forward again to the most recent breeding atlas, so 2008 to 2011, again you can see actually over that time barn owl populations in Great Britain have actually done very well and have increased. And you can see here that this is probably reflective of a large part of our monitoring, which there's been a huge focus in the southwest. But again, barn owls were lost from many parts of Ireland over that period, which is quite worrying, and was estimated a 40% decline in their breeding range over the course of the breeding bird atlases over that 40-year period. Over recent years, then we've put a lot of effort into carrying out surveys and also monitoring of barn owls to learn more about their distribution, the type of nest sites they use, the nest site availability for them, and that's been going from strength to strength, and the number of sites that we record and that we monitor each year increases each year. And last year, as of the end of last year, this is the number, the sites that we were focusing on last year and that we monitored, 192 nest sites. And you can see it's predominantly spread kind of through here, the obviously Galway here, and then parts of the Midlands and parts of the southwest. And so this is the breakdown, kind of show you visually of the sites, and definitely these areas need kind of outside this core range need more attention. And also as well that there's been a lot of work done recently up in the north through the Ulster Wildlife Trust and barn owls, and they're I suppose it's fair to say struggling up there in terms of finding nest sites, and I think it's 4 nest sites that they had recorded last year, and that's kind of fairly standard. So there definitely is a significant variation kind of geographically in the country in terms of barn owl populations and how they're faring, and typically the southwest would be where the population is doing best. And this is all the sites that we've recorded and monitored. So 422 over the past 10 years, which is a good number, but again there are definitely a lot more sites out there that we're still hoping to find and to register. And in parts of the country, delighted to say that numbers are increasing, and we're finding new sites, where whether they be nest boxes or buildings that barn owls previously haven't used in quite some time, that barn owls are establishing in again. And that's exactly the one of the main types of nest sites that they use is all round structures like this, and this is an absolute perfect site for barn owls, and not just barn owls, for a whole range of other wildlife. And I have a bit of a fetish when it comes to ruined structures, because they in Ireland we're so lucky because we still have a lot of these types of buildings intact in the landscape, and obviously really important from a historic perspective, from a cultural perspective, but so important from a biodiversity perspective as well, and for barn owls, but also for many other species, so kestrels, raven, peregrine, swift, also several species of bat, and say particularly here in Galway, lesser horseshoe bat, which occurs along the west coast. And so barn owls, this is a typical nest site for barn owls in Ireland. They'll tuck themselves deep down chimneys or in cavities, and typically out of view, and kind of dry, dark, secluded places. And just to give you the breakdown, so out of all the sites that we recorded last year, the 192 that we monitored, you can see the breakdown between the different site types of farm buildings, castles, farmhouses, ruined mansions, most important. You can see trees there as well, with 23 nest sites in trees, but definitely they go more that they go undetected more so than buildings, just because they're more difficult to find. With buildings, from the vast majority of buildings, you'll see obvious signs of barn owls. If barn owls are using the buildings, the likes of their pellets and whitewash and molted feathers, where that they can be a lot more discreet, the signs, when it comes to trees. So now a little look closer to home. These are some of these ruined structures in Galway, which, as I say, are just hugely important for wildlife, and barn owls can really really benefit from these sites, and they all have their own story to tell, both in terms of their history, but also the species that use them. This is one particular one that visited last summer, and it was fantastic. This was a record-setting brood for Galway. There was actually, we'd a brood of 6 barn owl chicks at this site last summer, which is the highest brood that were ever recorded in the county. And I remember going back a few years ago, I remember getting a call about a brood of 6 barn owls from a different spot in the county, and I got very excited, dropped everything, went there straight away, and was kind of get chatting to the landowners, and it all sounded perfect. And then when it came time to check it out and to have a look at the nest, it actually turned out to be a brood of swallows. So it really goes to show you the need to interrogate records. So to be honest, I thought I would never, or it'd be a long time before I saw a brood of 6 barn owls in Galway. So to see that last year is just really positive, and hopefully a sign of things to come. Hopefully a sign that the population is starting to recover in this part of the country, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly as well. That's two of the 6. There was quite a large nest site, and they were quite spread out. So that's 2 of the brood of the famous, the record-setting brood of 6. But so as I say, and just such a really good network of these types of buildings throughout the country, and so important that we preserve these and make sure that they remain suitable for wildlife. Because it's not just barn owls, it's so many other species, and as well, just to show you, to give an idea of the importance of this is a castle in Galway, just to give an idea of the importance of these sites. This map shows that the barn owl nest sites that we know have been active for over 25 years. So there was a small scale survey done 25 years ago, and some of the sites that were recorded then are still used by barn owls, and we would monitor. And this particular castle in Galway, even though the records kind of in terms of the barn owl surveys go back 25 years, but talking to the landowner there, he said that his grandfather I used to say there was barn owls there all using that area all during his time. So you'd imagine that their use of the site goes back a lot further than that. So and that's one good thing about barn owls, that they're pretty site faithful, and that once the nest site itself remains suitable, barn owls typically use that year after year, and often even use the exact same nest site year after year. So that's a thing, that's a beneficial thing in terms of their conservation, because once we make sure that their nest sites are protected, then that's obviously going to give them a helping hand. And also as well, folks, they're on the large kind of ruined structures, and they're probably the most impressive to look at, but it doesn't have to be those, like the small, a 2-story farmhouse here and small derelict cottages. Once there's a suitable nesting space for barn owls, they'll use a range of different buildings, and primarily abandoned buildings, derelict buildings, but also we have some nest sites where birds are using occupied houses, say where there's block chimneys, and also as well. That, as I mentioned, they'll use trees, and these are lime trees here, where there's kind of a big bulbous cavity of sticks and branches, and they can just tuck themselves in there, and they can be very difficult to find when they're using trees like these. More kind of classic barn owl trees are these that have hollow cavities in them. And this is a tree just actually on the Galway border that birds have used in recent years. And then as well, in terms of other nest sites, we can also build artificial nest sites for barn owls, and these are examples of barn owl nest boxes. And this is a great way to provide barn owl nest boxes in areas where there's suitable habitat and where there may not be other available nest sites. Is a really good way of it's a really good conservation tool. And the thing about in Ireland, we've seen in Great Britain that this has been one of the most successful conservation tools for barn owls, because it was shown there that barn owls were limited by the lack of nest sites. Here in Ireland, from survey work we've done, we've seen that generally there's that there's good availability of buildings in the countryside. So nest boxes are a great conservation tool, but they're not going to have the same effect, the same benefit population-wise as in Great Britain, unfortunately, but still really important conservation tool. And in situations, as I mentioned, like providing nest boxes and suitable habitat, also if there's existing nest sites in buildings and they're becoming unsuitable, whether the building is in a bad state of repair and is at risk of falling, or if there's renovation works planned, that we can provide nest boxes and allows the birds to remain in the area and provide a safe and secure nest site. And also as well means that our monitoring work is a lot easier. When barn owls, we know that they're in sites, we can protect them, and they likely, as long as the nest box stays suitable, they'll likely use that site year after year after year. And delighted to say it's been absolutely fantastic, and there's been huge efforts right throughout the country in terms of nest box schemes in the past of local groups and tidy towns groups and individual landowners, as well as nest box projects through ourselves, through BirdWatch Ireland. Last year we recorded barn owls using nesting in 59 nest boxes, which again is the highest that we've recorded in any year to date, and that continues to increase year after year, which is just fantastic. So it's going to be interesting to see now. We're just in the middle of our monitoring work, and interesting to see how many additional or new nest boxes are used this season. But it's been fantastic just to see the response of birds to nest boxes, and we hope it continues to increase. And again, similar to the sites, all the nest boxes have their own background, their own story. This is an interesting one from last year, whereby you can see this absolutely amazing, impressive looking structure, luxurious nest box, was built by a highly skilled carpenter, actually out of Lebanese cedar, and put it up at the back of a church here. And we knew there was barn owls around in this area, and they did move into the church, which is not the nest box, and they actually moved into this chute here. And this was quite some years ago now. So this was back in 2010 that we started to monitor this pair, and they've nested in this chute, and completely ignored the lovely looking nest box not too far away from the chute, just meters away from the chute. And jackdaws actually took up residence a couple of breeding seasons in the nest box, and the only use that barn owls seemed to make of it was to perch on the top, and often at the end of the breeding season you'd see it was covered in whitewash, but didn't actually use the nest box itself, despite it being absolutely ideal. And then last year, for the first time, went back and checked the chute, and there was the male and female were in there. So initially thought, okay, that maybe there was no sign of chicks, they may have been a failed pair. And then when we checked sorry, just to mention as well that in the chute, this is another modification and some of the work that we do. So this was there was an issue with this nest site one year. One of the chicks fell out. So with the local carpenter Hugh, he put up a platform to prevent that prevent that happening, and we haven't had any issues since. So the birds were happily nesting away in the chute, and a really productive site, really productive, always good numbers, good brood sizes. But then last year, first time, went back there, and lo and behold, they take into the nest box. So it took 10 years, but they eventually decided that that nest box was good enough for them. And so it really shows perseverance can pay off. And this is another example. This guy, Tom Gallagher, who set up a nest box project a long time ago while he was principal of a national school. He set up a nest box project as part of a biodiversity competition at the time. They won that biodiversity competition. This is back in 1993. And since then he kind of, the boxes are up for quite some time, and kind of forgotten about for a while. And then when we started our monitoring work again, he kind of, sprung back to life, and we ended up going around checking those boxes. And most of them were still intact, still in place, and most of them actually had barn owls in them. And this was only one of the ones that didn't, which is right across the road from him. And then last spring, he heard a barn owl screeching close to the nest box, and we went as part of our nest visits, checked it, and there was a female and 5 chicks in the in the nest box. So it took almost 30 years for that nest box to be used, but eventually it was, and it's being currently used again this season, which is great. And then so that's part of the work that we do is visiting nests and getting information in terms of, you know, how the birds are faring, are they breeding successfully, you know, how productive they are, and also any issues, you know, recordings and mortality, recording the health of the chicks, and recording, you know, allows us to build up a picture of the factors that affect barn owls, both at a site level, at a nest site level, but also, you know, also, you know, at a national level. And this is just a short clip to give you an idea of the nest visits, and we do this under license, and always really careful that, you know, we time it appropriately, and we're not causing any disturbance at the nest or to the adults. And so essentially, and the information that we get, you know, is hugely valuable, and allows us to, you know, to inform their conservation and learn more about them. So we take the chicks down from the nest for about only takes about 5 minutes or so, and we take some measurements of them, which allows us to assess their age, their health, their condition, as well as their sex. And then we put a small ring around their legs, so it's a specially designed ring, especially for barn owls, and each ring has its own unique code. And then that means that if we come across this bird again, that we know its life history, we know how old it is, we know, you know, how far it's travelled, where its nest site was, and this allowed us to build up a big, you know, a really good picture of, you know, the longevity of birds, how long they survive, also causes of mortality when we're finding, you know, birds that were ringed and we find them subsequently dead, and unfortunately often case as road casualties, killed on the road, which I'll talk about, but gives really valuable information. And essentially that's what we're doing now in the county this time of the year, is this work, monitoring breeding. And you can see here, this is the picture from last year, and I mentioned as well the record brood of 6 at the nest site in Galway, and it's been great to see over the last couple of years you know, we've seen birds being productive during the breeding season, which is fantastic. And you can see the means of the average productivity of barn owls across the per county last year, and you can see kind of the Tipperary. The darkest there is kind of stands out, that was the most productive, where barn owls are most productive last year, but Galway was good also, which was absolutely great to see. And this is the trajectory of productivity over the past 10 years, and it can vary from year to year, and there can be, you know, different factors at play in terms of, you know, that can affect barn owl breeding success, such as, you know, weather conditions, when, you know, if there's barn owls are very poorly adapted to wet weather, to hunting in wet weather. So, you know, if it's a wet summer or stint of weather in the wet summer, that can have an effect. Such also as well, you know, how small mammal populations are faring, what the food sources are like. So it can vary, but in the last few years, as I say, it's been it's been going in the right direction, let's say, and that this really shows the value of, because with any species really, there's huge value in looking at the population over the long term, because if you just look at it in a single year, a couple of years, it can be difficult to work out trends, to see the bigger picture, and to see, you know, is the population, you know, in trouble, is it, you know, increasing, is it decreasing? So this is the value really of looking at it over a period of time. And also as well, what we've seen is that birds are breeding earlier as well. And last year was also, as well as being the most productive year that we've recorded, was also the earliest breeding season. And with you can see with many pairs laying in March, and then the bulk laying a little bit later in April. But in general, you know, even from over the very short period of time, the last, you know, even to compare 5 years ago, the breeding season is getting earlier. And this is some of the information then that we learn from birds that we ring, and movements of the birds. And you can see the green are nest sites where we ring birds, and then the red is where they're subsequently encountered. And so the majority of these, unfortunately, are birds that we would ring in the nest, and then, you know, a year later, or, you know, or even sometimes several years later, they're found dead, and by a member of the public, by farmers, sometimes by ourselves, and because of the unique code in the ring, that they can report them to us and to the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, and but also as well within that, there's also, which is the best thing to encounter, which is birds that we would ring as chicks in the nest, and then we encounter subsequently as breeding adults, and that is really fantastic to see when you see a bird that's healthy, that's doing well, that's breeding, and its life history, where it's from, and it's fantastic to see. And we have some really good examples of that. We've actually 2 birds in Kerry at the moment that when I started working on barn owls, they were, both of them were 2 of the first barn owls that I fitted rings to back in 2008, and we didn't manage to get tabs in them last year, but we hope we're hoping to this year, and we're hoping that they're still alive and well and breeding. So both of them are the oldest known barn owls that we know of in Ireland, and hopefully they're still there and doing well, both in breeding, were previously breeding in nest boxes. So, and then the other thing with barn owls is that it's a really interesting thing going on with barn owl diet in Ireland, and the small mammal species in general, and the different ranges of small mammal species, and this is one of the most influential things really that is driving their productivity, potentially the changes in the timing of breeding and everything, and it's really interesting situation, because for a small country we have different ranges of small mammal species that are present, and so if you're in one part of the county here in Galway, it's say if you're in East Galway or Mid Galway, and we have Bankfoal and we have Greater White-toothed Shrew, and then you go a little bit further west, you head out towards Connemara, and then we don't have those species. They will colonize over time, and they're not far from it, but so even within the county there's a huge variation in terms of the small mammal species present, and this one is probably the most important in terms of its influence on barn owls and on other predatory species, and this is the Greater White-toothed Shrew. And there's a really interesting backstory with these guys. So it was David Tosh and myself that made the discovery of the Greater White-toothed Shrew being present in Ireland, and back in 2008. So it's quite some time ago now, but still a very short period, in terms of how the Greater White-toothed Shrew is spread around the country. And we actually found it because of barn owls were feeding on these guys, or feeding on Greater White-toothed Shrew, found them in the pellets. And Dave didn't know what they were initially, but subsequently and quickly learned that it was these guys, the Greater White-toothed Shrew, and they're very much here to stay. They're thriving. Their population, Ireland seems to be particularly suitable for Greater White-toothed Shrew, and their population has just exploded and is expanding rapidly. And I need to update this map, because as soon as you create a map for Greater White-toothed Shrew, it means as soon you have to change it pretty much straight away, because they're turning up in new places all the time, and it's likely that their expansion has been aided by being moved by accidentally by people as well, and moving foodstuffs or livestock or the likes. So they are in Galway, and they're not. They haven't covered completely the county, but it's a very short space of time they will, and that seems to be having an effect on barn owls. And barn owls, where Greater White-toothed Shrew are present and where they've been established for some time, they tend to be the dominant prey item for barn owls. And we've recorded Greater White-toothed Shrew up to 18-90% of the diet at certain sites. And this is a kind of a typical, this is within a nest site. You can see these are 4 Greater White-toothed Shrews here, and these guys, they're about half. I'm sure you're familiar with the pygmy shrew, and that's our smallest mammal. And these guys are about twice the size, twice the biomass of pygmy shrew. And then we have Bankfoal here, which is another introduced species, and then 2 wood mice. And mentioning pygmy shrew, there's also a really interesting situation going on. And while Greater White-toothed Shrew may seem to be positive for barn owl populations, it can there's a flip side to that as well. And the arrival of Greater White-toothed Shrew seems to be having an effect on pygmy shrew populations, and we're carrying out a study at the moment to look at that and to look at how greater white-throated shrew are affecting pygmy shrew. But it seems that where greater white-throated shrew are present, that they outcompete and they displace pygmy shrew. And now in areas where greater white-throated shrew have been long established, they're basically pygmy shrew seem to be completely absent. But we want to get a better handle on that and trying to figure out better what's the actual status of pygmy shrew. Are they being lost entirely, or can they hold on in certain habitats? So that's their diet, and it's also their diet is important from those aspects that I mentioned, but also as well one of the risks for barn owls and for other wildlife generally is the use of rodenticides and use of rat poisons. And barn owls, as I mentioned, they definitely include rats and mice within their diet, and that's, as I mentioned, one of the reasons that they were very much known as the farmer's friend. And that can be very beneficial from our perspective, but it can create problems for barn owls, whereby if they're feeding on rats and mice that are contaminated, that have been in contact, that have consumed rat poison, then that spells trouble for barn owls. But as well, it's not only rats and mice that with rodenticides can get into the food chain. They can get into the lower levels of the food chain, and we're starting to learn that more and more. So it's not just the rats and mice that can be contaminated, it's the other small mammal species as well. The likes of greater white-throated shrew, bankfoal, wood mice, they can all be contaminated by rodenticides, by rat poisons. But not only them, invertebrates can be contaminated, and then if that they're at the lower levels of the food chain, then other birds can feed on them, and then these toxins can get into the lower levels of the food chain and accumulate towards the top, and that's what we've seen with barn owls. That they are very much susceptible to exposure to rodenticides, and we carried out a study which looked at the exposure to 269 barn owls, most of them which were recovered as road casualties, which were killed on the road. So weren't directly killed by rodenticides. And what we found is that over 88% of the birds that we tested had detectable levels of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, which are the most widely used rodenticides compounds. And just to put that in context, the concentration levels were actually 3 times greater in Irish barn owls compared to the UK. And some of the reasons for that potentially are how we use rodenticides in Ireland. So there are the patterns that we use them, the different compounds that we use, but also as well probably reflected in terms of barn owl diet. And as I said, very different situation in Ireland compared to Great Britain in relation to barn owls, and part of that is just the diet of birds, and we have fewer small mammal species in Ireland compared to Great Britain, even though we've had a couple of relatively recent arrivals, but we don't have the likes of field vole or common shrew, which are important prey items for barn owls in Great Britain. And because of that, in large parts of the country, and particularly before the arrival of greater white-throated shrew, that Irish barn owls would feed to a larger extent on commensal rodents, so the likes of brown rat and house mouse. So this is definitely a huge issue in Ireland, not only in Ireland but wherever rodenticides are used. And we work with what's called the Campaign for Responsible Rodenticide Use to try and change practice, try and change use of rodenticides, try and improve awareness. But it requires an awful lot more work, and it's going to remain an issue, I think, until there's actual changes to policy. But it's an area that we're focusing on, and we've quite a bit of work planned this year as well, and part of which is to try and get a better handle on rodenticide use in Ireland. Another factor which definitely affects barn owls, and maybe one that we've been able to address more so in the short term, is their susceptibility to being killed on roads, and the effect of major roads, particularly major roads in barn owls. And I mentioned because of their flight, because of their hunting behaviour, they are one of the most susceptible birds to being hit on the roads. And And that's because they hunt mostly by hearing, but also they hunt very much kind of low to the ground, which is the danger zone, the strike zone, really, in terms of in terms of oncoming vehicles. So we've carried out a study, and we looked at the barn owl, basically what barn owls are dying from, barn owl mortality incidents, and you can see these are the mortality incidents that we recorded around the country, and then looked at where we had detailed information. We're able to work out, the cause of death, and you can see the road casualties are very much at the fore in terms of causes of mortality. Now we need to take that with a pinch of salt, because there is a bit of bias there in terms of, obviously, birds that are killed on the road are more likely to be encountered, more likely to be recorded, compared to birds that might die of other causes, such as rodenticide poisoning, such as starvation or predation or other factors. Because if they're on the road, they're more obvious, and that means they're more likely to be found and recorded. But still, nevertheless, kind of pretty shocking figures. And but really interesting as well, when we look at the breakdown of where barn owls were being killed in terms of the different road type, and motorways definitely are where the mortality is highest. And actually there was a couple of motorways major roads seem to be particularly problematic. One of those being the M8, where there's been a huge number of these casualties recorded. We actually worked out the number of barn owl road casualties 15 times higher on motorways than on national roads relative to the route length in Ireland. So it does seem to be major roads, that are the motorways and the dual carriageways, that are where the problems are primarily occurring. And so we carried out an extensive study a couple of years ago, which is now finished, I'm delighted to say. And the part of that was we looked at the M8, because that seemed to be one of the routes, at least, or one of the stretches of route here, kind of in South Tipperary into North Cork, whereby there was a lot of road casualties being recorded. We carried out a road casualty survey. It was actually through Aegis Langan, the road maintenance operatives, and the numbers that we recorded, they carried out a survey every day, and they recorded barn owls on the route, and we recorded 58 barn owls, and that worked out to be 27 barn owl casualties per 100 kilometres per year. But it's not a case that it's possible to record all the barn owl casualties, because some are going to be missed, whether they're scavenged, whether they're just not seen by the surveyors despite best efforts. So we need to take that into account as well. And when we take those surveyor biases into account, it works out at an estimated 51 barn owl casualties per 100 kilometres per year, which is a high number. And even comparing to other studies or the European countries, that's a high number, and particularly given the fact that in Ireland, barn owl densities are still relatively low compared to many other parts of Europe. But what was interesting is the road didn't seem to have an effect on the actual the population distribution, and there was pairs which were nesting in close proximity to the road, and the nest site would remain active year after year. So that was really interesting. We did that by comparing excuse me, my apologies. We did that by comparing the barn owl distribution of barn owl nest sites in close to the motorway, and then another area that we compared with, which is 20 kilometres essentially to the west. And we recorded more nest sites in the close to within the motorway area, but also some of the nest sites, interesting to see that they were close to the road, and they remain active year after year. And so we also wanted to look at why birds are being killed on the road, because that's obviously integral to inform what we can do about it from a conservation perspective. And part of that was looking at were birds being attracted to the road to hunt. So we carried out a survey of small mammals along the roadside, and also in surrounding habitats, to look and see. And what we found was that the rough grass verges of motorways were fantastic habitat for small mammals. And because it was Tipperary, it was these guys in particular, great white-legged shrew and bankvole, as well as the wood mouse. They were the three main species that were recorded, but numbers are very, very high in these areas, and that does indicate that these rough, and particularly in intensive agricultural landscapes, these rough grass strips are that roadside verges are, potentially suitable foraging habitat for barn owls. So we wanted to figure that out in more detail. So we carried out the first study, which looked at in detail barn owl behaviour, foraging, hunting behaviour in relation to road networks, and we did that with the use of GPS transmitters. So small, lightweight GPS transmitters, which would fit to the birds and then allow us to track their movements as they moved about the countryside at night, as they hunted at night. And these are the home ranges of some of the birds. And this is unfortunately that video isn't playing, so I might come back to that, but it just showed a female with that we had fitted a tag to, and then basically we released the bird and then we retrieved the tag about 2 weeks later, and we have this information then that we can compile and we can assess and work out that bird's behaviour over that time, where it was going, where it was hunting, and how far it was travelling, and also as well its interactions with the roads. And what we saw very early on was that birds were regularly encountering the road. They were regularly flying across the road. They were regularly also perching alongside the road and hunting along the roadside verges. So we worked out that roadside verges, where they're present within the home range of birds, were important foraging habitats. And you can see these red dots here where the bird was perched. So it spent a lot of time either flying across the road or hunting alongside the road, but obviously without this bird bred successfully and bred successfully the following year as well. And so what we have done is we've developed, working with Transport Infrastructure Ireland, who funded that study. I'm delighted to say that all that research was used to based on information on the extent of mortality, where barn owls were being killed in relation to roads, and also the importance of roads in terms from a foraging perspective and how birds used major roads. So we used all that, and working with Transport Infrastructure Ireland and their engineering, road user safety team, landscaping team, we developed these mitigation measures, which essentially which are now a requirement for all new road projects, which is fantastic. And alongside these, we developed survey standards, which now mean that there's standards in place that have to be adhered to in relation to assessing the impacts of roads and barn owls. So the mitigation measure essentially tries to, where there's wide verges, tries to maintain the rough, the grass, the strips which are a suitable foraging habitat, and also it then creates a barrier there to basically try and force the birds away from the danger zone, away from the road, while maintaining the suitable foraging conditions. And the idea of this then is that there's a natural barrier screen in terms of tree-lined vegetation, and then vegetation at the base to reduce the wake effect also of particularly heavy goods vehicles, going at speeds on the road, because it seems that some barn owls are likely killed not by direct collision with vehicles, but by being forced onto the ground when caught in the wake of a vehicle. And then this side of the road, there's no suitable foraging conditions for barn owls, so that it's either short grass or stones, so basically the birds aren't going to be hunting there, and then the hard shoulder, so that any suitable foraging conditions are over this side, protected by a barrier. And if birds, then they have to rise above the danger zone in terms of crossing the road. So that's so I'm delighted to say that, and as part of the work then obviously we're going to be evaluating the effectiveness of these and seeing if there's any tweaks that need to be made, but delighted to say that that these are now a requirement for new road projects. And that's essentially what we're trying to do is to use that information from and to inform practical conservation measures such as these. So I've been talking for a long time, so I'm gonna wrap it up, but there's loads of other resources that if you want more information on barn owls, the work that I just described there in relation to the barn owls and major roads, you can find it on these links there on the Transport Infrastructure Ireland website. We published a guidance document for wildlife in buildings earlier on in the year, which contains loads of information about buildings and which wildlife use them, why they're important for wildlife, and how we can help conserve wildlife in buildings. Also with Galway County Council and Creative Ireland, there was and Susan O'Donoghue and Robert Fawn, we published a book on barn owls, a children's book on barn owls, which is absolutely fantastic. It looks absolutely beautiful. So definitely check that out. That's on the Galway Community Heritage website as well as the link there. And then other resources as well on the BirdWatch Ireland website. We have a booklet on information on conservation of barn owls, all the guides in terms of nest box plans and how to site, build and nest boxes, and also information on how to recognise where there's barn owls, and also the Barn Owl Trust in the UK has really fantastic resources on barn owls. So loads of other resources if you want to find out more about barn owls. And as I say, we've got an exciting year ahead planned with Galway County Council and National Biodiversity Action Plan Fund. So we're going to be carrying out surveys and monitoring conservation work, and also a range of education initiatives on barn owls in the county over the coming months. So keep tuned for those as well. And just to say a few thanks, always with anything related to barn owls, there's always a long list of people to thank, but I'm just going to mention some, and first and foremost Marie Mannion, who's the Heritage Officer in Galway, who supports this work and has just been a powerful force of nature for conservation in general, and great to work with her. And also thanks to the photographers that have used and provided the images. So Mike Brown and Richard Mills, who've got some of the best images probably the best images of barn owls in Ireland. John Murphy as well for some great white-teeth shrew images, and also RSPB images, who are always very generous and have a fantastic bank of images, and also some of our own images. A lot of them were either mine or Dario and Michael that work closely with us. And also just thanks to all the landowners both in the county and nationally. Obviously none of this work would be possible without the landowners, farmers, who allow us to monitor the sites, allow us access to the lands, to put up nest boxes. And also there's a huge range of people who help with the monitoring, reporting sightings, reporting mortality incidents, and helping to monitor. So thanks to everybody, and because there's a huge amount of work that goes into this, but through a huge amount of people. And hopefully you enjoy the talk, and hopefully you enjoy National Biodiversity Week, and check out the other videos and the other range of resources on Galway Bio Facebook and Galway Bio YouTube, because there's been some fantastic videos and other resources and a whole range of things, like gardening for wildlife and everything that has gone up earlier in the week. And fair play to Marie and to Galway County Council for driving that. It's great to see that interest and momentum in Galway. So thank you very much, everybody.